I'm Scott L. Miller. It's the 21st of September, 2023. This is my vlog of daily life living in Leon, Nicaragua. And today we're going to be doing another Q&A session. I had some questions that you guys wrote in, and we're going to be answering those. It is a super bright day out here, so I'm enjoying a little bit of shade and not doing any walking because we've got a lot of stuff going on the last couple of days, just very busy. And so I don't have time to get out and do a recording, because when I do that, it actually takes like 2 hours for me to go out and do that. And sometimes getting a 2-hour window in which I can go walking and record is not something I can do. So I'm doing this in between things as I'm waiting for food before heading off to a meeting. But we're going to get to your guys' questions for the day right after the bump. All right, thanks to everyone who wrote in, and if you are unaware of what to do or you have questions of your own as we go through things that you want to ask or just comments you want to make or whatever, scroll down. If you're on a computer or on the phone, you can go down and leave comments right on the channel. If you are on a television, you'll have to find a computer or whatever. A lot of people watch on the television and then say, Scott, I don't know how to leave comments. That's how you do it. You got to do it from a computer. Sorry, I don't know any TV that lets you do that. That would be super handy. So we've got a couple questions today. Coming up tomorrow, my plan is to have an episode where we're going to do some looking at pricing on restaurants here in Leon. We're going to use Pedidos Ya and actually take you through what some of the restaurants cost for real items in real time, so you can see those and get an absolute feel for what it's like here. You can't see Pedidos Ya or Ugo when you're abroad. You have to be here with a local phone number to be able to see them at all. They won't bring up the application, and so that's a whole bit of pricing that we can show you and give you. You know, this is what if you were standing here, you could order food for these prices right this second, and I think that'd be really interesting, but valuable for people who are like, well, I don't really have a good understanding of what food is going to cost. And of course, these will be restaurants and delivery, so a little bit more expensive than if you're going out to eat, and way more expensive than if you're eating on the street or cooking for yourself. But I think it's going to be pretty useful. So that is my plan for tomorrow. Today, we've got some viewer questions. So let's get right into it. All right, our first question is coming in from Elizer Zelaya. Sometimes people make up names, sometimes it's real names, and sometimes it's all run together, and I don't really know how to pronounce it, so I apologize. All right, hey Scott, great vid. Not sure you've talked about this on other videos, because I've done like 3,000, but is there any tourism on the west part of the country? Actually means east part. Have you ever had the chance to visit Bluefields or Puerto Cabeza? So I live in western Nicaragua, just so everybody has an orientation. I live on the Pacific coast. I mean, it's more than 5 minutes away, but it is, I can't hear the waves or anything, but I have walked to it from where I'm standing. So it is reasonably close, about 12 kilometers. And this part, Leon and Chinandega, which split off from Leon some 100 years ago or so, are considered Nicaragua Occidental or Western Nicaragua. So these areas specifically are not just the west coast, but Western Nicaragua, just so you have some terminology as it is applied here. When you come into southern Leon, there's a big tourism billboard that says, welcome to Western Nicaragua, for example. So this is the west, and yes, I visit it all the time, and yes, it's pretty big on tourism. But the actual question that they meant to ask was about the east. That is the much larger coast, the Costa Caribe, or the Caribbean coast, and that area has nearly double the coastline of the Pacific coast. So if you're looking at a map, it is very likely that you're going to see that and think that that is where the majority of things are going to be. But even though it is really large and has a ton of water, there's not a lot of tourism on the East Coast. That's not to say that there's zero. Someone's definitely going to jump into my channel and be like, Scott, I've been out there. There was a hotel. There was a tourist. Yes, I understand. In Western Nicaragua, there is a ton of tourism, right? Granada is a major tourist destination. San Juan del Sur is huge. Managua has a fair number of tourists. Leon sees them every day. Even much more remote places like Jinotepe or Rivas are going to see some number of tourists. We get a number of them out here, but the East Coast gets an extremely small number. And this is for a number of reasons. On a map, it looks like the East Coast must be the most amazing place to go that you could possibly imagine, because it is a enormous stretch of Caribbean beach facing east. Imagine the sunrises out there. And let's be clear, I've not spent time on the East Coast. I plan to get out there pretty soon. I really want to get out there and film and bring a lot more of that content here, because it really would be something totally different and a lot of fun for me. But there's reasons why we don't just run out there. If you spend a little bit of time on a map, you'll start to realize there are some problems. One is that there's essentially no infrastructure linking the west side of the country to the east. All of the population is on the west coast, very near to the ocean, but not quite on the ocean. That's a uniquely Nicaraguan thing. But in the east, you have a population that is almost entirely on the ocean, which is great on the Caribbean, but nothing in between. And the distance between the west coast and the east coast is significant. And the larger population centers, like the capital of the Mosquito Coast Bluefields, is pretty far south. Not all the way, but decently far south. So traveling from the west coast to the east coast also generally requires coming from the north to the south, because most of the population in western Nicaragua is not just on the west coast, but shifted towards the north. As you go south towards Rivas, it drops off significantly. Rivas is popular as a tourist destination, but not particularly popular from a population perspective. Traditionally, going out to the east coast, particularly Puerto Cabeza or Bluefields, required taking a flight out of Managua. There was no other reasonable way to get there from other points in Nicaragua. Now, in the last number of years, the first highways have started being constructed so that there's reasonable roads going out. There was always like dirt paths through the jungle. If you watch one of those shows like Dangerous Roads from a few years ago, they actually show the road to Puerto Cabeza and list it as one of the like 12 most difficult roads in the world to drive because it was so significant trying to get out there. So I recommend go find one of those on like Netflix or something. It's worth it just to be like, that's what it's like? Yeah, that's not a tour. That's not a tourist road in any way whatsoever. It looks like you're going through the Amazon or in one of those world's most dangerous roads in Bolivia kind of things. It's really not that bad. They overblow those things for the show, but it's a rough road no matter what. Passing it reliably was difficult, but that is mostly fixed now. Nicaragua has had huge infrastructure upgrades, and there are ways to get to the other coast. So now getting to Bluefields, and Bluefields is significant for tourism only because it is a launch point to the Corn Islands, which are very touristy. Those are Nicaragua's populated Caribbean islands. They're very small. They're not incredibly famous, but they do get quite a bit of tourism, and they're famous for their beautiful Caribbean beaches. They are real Caribbean islands, so they're just like anywhere else in the Caribbean from a it's a beautiful island kind of perspective. But the coast of Nicaragua is mostly empty. It is a very low population zone with very little infrastructure or tourism. It's an incredibly poor region. So if you're looking at Nicaragua, and most people do, even when you're watching this show, you tend to look at Nicaragua and say, okay, it's pretty poor. That could be a challenge. And when people get here, they're often hit by, okay, it feels more poor than I was prepared for, and that's something that's a little bit tough. My dog has the zoomies and is running around the yard in case you can hear her, and she just crashed into my legs. But if you come to Nicaragua and you say, okay, there's a lot of poverty and I'm struggling with that, this is the rich part of Nicaragua, that's the poor part. So as you go, it becomes even more of a lacking in resources, lacking in infrastructure, lacking in things zone. So it doesn't tend to attract tourism for a lot of reasons. But importantly, just traveling from, say, this part, now we're pretty far northwest, but if you're coming from Managua, yes, you can take a flight to Bluefields, and that's not terrible. But most people, if you're going to get on a plane, just fly onto the Corn Islands, not to Bluefields. If you're going to travel there some other way, by car or by bus, you're looking at an entire day of travel. Literally, you get up first thing in the morning and drive all day. It's a really long way, and it's a lot of, I'm sure the first time really exciting, and I want to do it. I want to do a Drive Warp episode where we film all the way across the country from the west coast to the east coast. I think it'd be crazy interesting. I would love to make it, and I think you guys would like to watch it. So look for that sometime in the future. But that's a really long way, and if you're doing it just one time, sure, but you got to drive out there, you got to drive back. You can't make connections from out there. Like, it's just a one-way trip into the wilderness, and then you have to return when you're done. So it's a lot of effort, a lot of time, and a lot of work, and in many cases a fair amount of money to get out to anything on the coast. And we're only talking about getting to Bluefields. Once you want to get to anything else, like the kind of touristy Pearl Lagoon area, and that's its real name, Pearl Lagoon in English. Remember, the east coast of Nicaragua primarily speaks English. It is essentially a Jamaican colony zone, the Mosquito Coast, and so it's a completely different population, different linguistic zone, everything. Culturally, it is very different, and those are autonomous states. The two departamentos out there on the Caribbean coast are highly autonomous and operate quite differently than the rest of Nicaragua. So when you get out there, you're traveling a long way, and just to get from Bluefields to the Pearl Lagoon is a bit of travel on you know, relatively remote roads. If you want to go anywhere else, and most people, when they're looking at a map, think you must want to go to all these other places, you're getting into a level of difficulty or a level of impossibility that you may not be in any way expecting. Now, I want to get out there and film it and really show some of this so we have a much better idea of what it's like, but you can also take Google Maps and just go look at Bluefields, look at Pearl Lagoon, look at Puerto Cabeza, and get a feeling for what those locations are like, and then look out from them a little bit. You're really looking at a jungle where it comes in to the ocean. That zone, those two departamentos out there, represent the world's second largest wild jungle, second only to the Amazon. So that's what we're talking about, having to cross and fly over or whatever in order to get to that coast. There's lots of beautiful stuff on that coast, a lot of open area, a lot of potential opportunity, yes, but a lot of people, when we say that, instantly jump to, ooh, what a great place to invest. And I can tell you that is not the case at all, right? Nicaragua is a relatively undeveloped country, and when we're talking about development opportunities, first of all, we warn people that there just aren't the opportunities to make big money that you think that there are, that salespeople want to convince you of. But when there are any opportunities, you're looking at places like Granada, San Juan del Sur, they're the leading edge of that. Managua and Leon following a little bit behind, places like Chinandega and Matagalpa behind that. And there's a lot of behind this before you start getting to and Bluefields and Puerto Cabeza. Those things are so far away from becoming developed as a tourist zone, so far away from getting the development energy of other parts of the country that are already waiting a long time to get those things, that investing there, sure, if you wanted to buy land, this is a great time. You would get very good deals on land, but you may be looking at lifetimes before it becomes an up-and-coming destination, and that is not generally the length of time you want to be looking at for an investment. Chances are you would do much better investing just about anywhere else, unless you want to live out there. If you go out to Bluefields, Puerto Cabeza, Pearl Lagoon, and discover that it's an area you want to be in, and you don't mind how remote it is, you like the culture, the food, the weather, the views, the cost of living, excellent. For sure, go out. It's a great time to buy for you, but if you're looking at going out there as a business opportunity, be warned that the chances of that being a good investment are dramatically less than the chances of investing out here, which in the West Coast, which we already warn you about. Now, that said, we have heard that there is dredging about to start or underway, that they're planning on taking Bluefields and trying to modify it to be able to be a deep water port. Puerto Cabeza is the main port right now on the East Coast, and it's not a deep water port. It does take a bit of shipping, but it doesn't take the deepest drafts. That's limited to the Pacific coast here at the Port of Corinto. All of our big container ships come in there, mostly coming from China, but some coming through the Panama Canal, because this is how they have to get to things. If you are on the East Coast, you only have Puerto Cabeza, and it's very limited, but Bluefields is going to, in theory, have a deep water port that is going to revitalize Bluefields and the entire Caribbean coast significantly, but we don't know how much, we don't know when it's going to be done, and there's just a lot of ifs in that entire thing. So be aware. Yes, if you're looking at the port as being the reason that investment might make sense, it is possible, but you're looking at a lot of unknowns, and there's every possibility that it will not do anything, but it is not a tourist facility. Sorry for the change of location and clothing. I had to make a run to Costa Rica in between different segments of today's episode, but I'm back, and we're going to be answering Christy Orcutt's question. Hey, Scott, do you feel that the new highway will help with the more remote beaches like Salinas Grande, for example? All right, so she's talking about the new, what we call the Pacific Coast Highway, but it is the Nicaraguan Pacific Beach Highway. I don't know its real name. Anyway, so they've been talking for a number of years, and approval for it has happened, and construction has actually begun on building a highway to connect the western beaches. So this is really important to picture. If you have not looked, bring up a map of Nicaragua, specifically look at the West Coast, look at the Pacific, and get an idea. First of all, while it's not, we just said, it's not nearly as big as the East Coast, right? The Caribbean coast is enormous, but the Pacific coast is not small. And on the Pacific coast, it is this really long distance with many, many beaches, and a highway would be fantastic. But in the middle, at the north side of Rivas, at the south side of Carazo, is a major wildlife preserve. And the highway, I guarantee, is not going to touch that. And so there's going to be a southern segment. I don't have any details on this, right? I'm just telling you what is obvious. There's going to have to be a southern segment in Rivas that connects the really touristy beaches centered around San Juan del Sur. That's where the tourist industry is. That's where there's a real problem getting to the beaches. Many of those beaches are, no Nicaraguans go there, only tourists. by and large, and they're extremely hard to get to, right? Because the Rivas is remote, just in general. It's a very lowly populated area, just like the Nicoya in Costa Rica is its least populated zone. That whole area is just very few people, but it does get a lot of tourism, specifically around its beaches. So connecting those beaches is really important and necessary, as there's no other infrastructure there, like nothing. Then you have this preserve, and then you have the northern beaches. Most of the northern beaches are already well connected to cities. Each one of the northern beaches has an associated city with it, whether it's Titiambra, Managua, Leon, Chinandega, El Viejo, whatever. There's a city not that far away. Some of them get pretty far, some of them are pretty close, but they're always associated with one. Now, there are a few beaches in that zone that are far enough away that we think of them as being a little bit remote, like El Tránsito, which is ridiculously remote. However, it is already very close to being connected to the highway at Valero, right? So there's already highways connecting a lot of these places. The Leon beaches, the Leon city beaches, that is, Aponaloya and Las Penitas, extremely well connected. I mean, completely highway the whole way. Porto Sandino, Miramar, I believe it is, and Valero, really well connected, brand new highway. El Tránsito is an outlier that it is stuck with nothing to connect it yet, except for really rough dirt roads. Salinas Grande sits in between these two zones and is connected to nothing else but has a dirt road running to it. So that's kind of where that question comes from. So let's look at the general question and answer that first. Do I think that putting in a major highway connecting the beaches in Nicaragua is going to do a lot for bringing them a better connectivity to the rest of the country? Absolutely. Like, that, I think, goes without saying. Right now, many of these beaches are so remote that you might as well have to fly in by helicopter. You're right. The only way to get in there is you have like a Jeep or some other like hardcore 4x4, big Toyota Hilux with four-wheel drive, high clearance, and someone who knows how to drive and is willing to go on rough roads, and you have to go quite some distance at very slow speeds to have any hope of getting there. It makes a lot of them very undesirable. And that's one of the reasons why we talk about you need to really carefully evaluate and get to know the area before you even consider shopping around for homes. Because almost always when someone talks to me about houses they found remotely or plots of land they're interested in buying, it's in a place so inaccessible that it's often inaccessible to a degree that someone in the United States or Canada would never have considered that something could be so inaccessible and still be selling a lot. And so when you get here, you may be like, oh, I spent $50,000, I got this lot, and you find out it's worth $500 and no one can get there, and you might as well throw it away. That's a real tragedy, and people are doing that constantly. There's a huge business in buying pennies on the dollar lots that are worth nothing, and then, I guess they're not really pennies on the dollar, they're simply just worth pennies, right? They're worthless land in places that may have a good view, may be nice, but they're inaccessible, and so nobody wants them. And then going online and saying, look at these pretty pictures, wouldn't you like to buy this? And someone says, oh, it's going to be snatched up, because that's what everybody claims, and then they spend $20,000, $50,000, $80,000, $90,000, $100,000 to buy a lot, and people here are like $500 tops, right? And then what are you going to do with it? Now, it's impossible to build there because you can't get a construction crew in. You don't want to live there because you can't handle the drive, whatever. It's a terrible situation. So connecting many of those beaches, I don't know how many of those are going to be connected. I know that kind of the stated goal is that all of them are going to be, but that's unrealistic. But that many of them are going to be connected is a really big deal, and that's what they're doing. They want to make this really large, really important beach ecosystem of Nicaragua much more like how it is in El Salvador, for example, where there is a highway that runs along the coast and you're able to just zip from beach to beach, and all the beaches share an ecosystem. And like, if you live on one beach, you can use the resources on the next because they're all so close to each other. Right now, if you're in San Juan del Sur, going to the very next beach can be a big pain. It's very doable, but it's way more effort than you might think. Even going from one side of San Juan del Sur's beach to the other side over the River Escondido can be a huge pain. And you may think, it's right there, I'm only going 2 or 3 buildings away, I can yell to the people in that building. But if you need to move your car from that house to that house, that could take 15 minutes. That's a really big annoyance when you're dealing with food deliveries or people want to go to restaurants. It changes how people are able to interact with the beaches. So fixing some of those things would be a really big deal, but realistically, the highway can only fix so much of that. The terrain is very rough. So we're going to see how it's going to play out. We're also going to see how long it's going to take. This project has been on the books for many years, and they only just started breaking ground, and we have not actually seen it go anywhere yet. They're really working on it, but I don't know how fast they're going to move. I don't know how fast additional portions of the highway are going to be connected, and we don't know when they're going to make the leap from the southern beaches to the northern beaches. So be prepared that right now it is only a very small area directly connected to San Juan del Sur that they're even talking about actively doing. Anything beyond that could be years or decades away, and the project may not continue on past where it is now, right? It could easily be canceled in the many, many years it will take to start moving outside that zone. So I expect that most likely many of the beaches in Departamento Rivas will become connected by that highway, but to assume it's going to come up here and affect us in the Managua, Chinandega, Leon region, we would like to see some growth based on that, but we're not holding our breath. Realistically, it may not happen in our lifetime, so that's just something we need to be aware of. Now, all that said, how is that going to play into affecting someplace like Salinas Grandes? Well, realistically, it probably won't help Salinas Grandes. There's no way to connect Salinas Grandes by a highway up to Las Penitas, which is its next beach. The two of them are directly next to each other, separated only by the Isla Juan Venado, which is a protected wildlife preserve. There's no way the highway is going to go through there, nor does Las Penitas want a highway going south out of it, nor does Salinas Grande want a highway going north out of it. It would destroy both beaches and the preserve in between. That's never going to go onto the books, never going to be considered, and there's no reason for it. Las Penitas and Ponaloya are already excellently connected into the city. There's probably no way to connect them north into the Chinandega beaches at Corinto. Also, we don't care, right? It's not that we don't want to go to Corinto, but it's not a big deal. Having a faster way to get there is not going to be beneficial for us. And so that's, we expect that at least in this zone, north of Puerto Sandino and south of Corinto, that there's not going to be ever a Pacific Coast Highway project to connect things along this region. It just doesn't make any sense logically. If you really look at the lay of the land, you can't overcome it by putting in a highway. The best that they could do is simply turning the awful, unmaintained, totally garbage dirt road that goes out to Salinas Grandes into a pavered road. And they could do that regardless of the Pacific Coast Highway. And if they are going to do anything there, I expect that to happen easily 10 years before the highway even talks about coming into the zone. So if you're thinking Salinas Grandes may magically be upgraded to a connected beach, that's possible, but it will definitely not be because of the highway project. It will be because of something else. Salinas Grandes easily will be the last beach to become connected in all of Nicaragua, because, at least outside of Rivas. There are some beaches in Rivas that could remain outrageously remote because they are so remote. Salinas Grandes is not actually remote. It is simply an outlier beach sitting between major beach zones. The beach zone to the north of it, Las Penitas and Ponaloya, is probably the second San Juan del Sur of the country. It's the next up-and-coming beach zone. It has really good connections directly into Leon City. It is already well developed. Both beaches completely connect to each other. It has it has dueling malecons. It has loads of restaurants, loads of hotels, activities going on, big concerts, investment actually happening. Not a ton, but it is actively being invested in. And so that zone is already taken care of. It doesn't care about the Pacific Coast Highway. It's not going to benefit from it. Directly north of that is the port of Corinto. That is not a tourist area, so there's no reason to connect those to each other or to connect Corinto to anything. It's already connected directly to Chinandega in the same way, but as a shipping port. So this really falls outside the project. To the south, you already have the big beach loop, which we did on the video, where you've got Valero and Puerto Sandino and other beaches that are connected, and all they have to do is finish the road in that loop, and El Transito and some others will magically become connected as well. And so that really large, slightly more remote beach zone will instantly become well connected to both Leon and Managua through that little upgrade, leaving Salinas Grandes isolated in that it sits on essentially a peninsula that is south of the big Leon proper beaches and then north of the El Centro beaches, or the southern Leon beaches. Salinas Grandes is just an outlier. There's no way around it. It's not far from Leon. It is not far from Nagarote and La Paz Centro, but it is so undeveloped, it is so undesirable because it is the salt farms and it has no infrastructure to make it worth investing into, that of all the beaches, if I had government money or the oversight of government money, of government planning, and had to say, where am I going to put money to do the best for the country, whether it's bringing in tourism or just providing resources for the Nicaraguans, in either case, the one place that I don't see a benefit to doing anything for a really long time is Salinas Grandes. That doesn't mean that putting in some pavers and turning that road into something wouldn't be a good idea, but it's a really long road with nothing at the end of it. No offense to the people who love Salinas Grandes, it is an absolutely beautiful beach, but there's nothing there, and there are beautiful beaches on either side of it that are already well connected, and they're not getting that much development. There isn't a drive for someplace like Salinas Grandes to have that. So if the hope is I'm going to get into Salinas Grandes, buy things super, super cheap because nothing's there because it's not connected, and magically it's going to become connected and everything's going to be worth a bunch of money and it's going to suddenly get developed and all this, maybe. But that could be 40 years from now, right? There's just no pressure to make that happen in the near term, and we're so many steps away from that happening that I would not anticipate ever seeing that happen. All right, and our last question for the day comes from Auntie KB4U. Kebao? I have no idea how that's supposed to be pronounced. And the question is it necessary to actually come to Nicaragua to find these prices, meaning the real estate prices that we talk about on the show? Because all the YouTube sites reflect prices for land that are 15,000 plus per acre. Every single video, every single conversation we have about this ends in exactly the same thing. Do not even look at a YouTube video, at a website, anything. If you find it, if it's online or in English, it is completely garbage. That means somebody went out and took the time to create stuff just to sell to a foreigner who isn't here doing their own shopping. And logically, this makes sense, because if you're come to the country, you will instantly know that prices like $15,000 per acre make no sense whatsoever. That would be absolutely bonkers, except for the most extreme circumstances, like really prime on the beach sand, and even then often 15,000 is pretty good. There's exceptions, but they're extremely rare. When we're talking about anything that isn't the actual sand of a beach, 15,000 for an acre is nuts. Like, I can't describe how crazy that is. So if you were to come to the country, you would instantly be like, oh, I could see paying 1,500 per acre. That falls within a realm of reason. More than that, sure, could happen, but 15,000 is so outrageously out of control. The highest I have ever heard is somewhere in the vicinity of 10,000 per acre. Right? And that was an extreme circumstance. I talk about this a number of times. That was an extreme circumstance with years of planning and people who really knew what they were doing, and still practically on the beach. Really special circumstances, right? And like special size lots and special access, all kinds of things. Exceptions exist, but that's the highest we've encountered in all the time we've been here. And I do a lot with real estate. These numbers are crazy. For normal land that you're looking at, you could be looking at hundreds of dollars per acre, given that is quite low, to several thousand per acre. That would be possible, right? Like, those are more the range that you would be thinking in, with 10,000 being an upward bound, unless, again, a really, so if you're looking at a tiny lot, a really, really premium lot, just big enough to hold a house, and it's, 1/8 of an acre. Of course, that 1/8 of an acre, when multiplied by 8, might come up to more than 15,000. That's kind of how subdivisions work, and you tend to pay for extreme premium spaces. But once you're buying an acre or more at a time, you need to really be thinking in different terms of numbers. But we're not going to go into too deep into that. We actually have an upcoming video, I think in 2 days. It could be tomorrow, but I think it's in 2 days, where we had someone who wrote to me privately, so we're not going to be like answering a question. But there was a bunch of stuff, and everyone makes the same mistakes, and we're going to cover that for them. But this is really important. I can never say this enough. Stop looking at everything online. Look at pictures of Nicaragua, look at tourism information of Nicaragua, learn where it's beautiful, learn about the regions, learn about the weather, learn about the culture, the food, all those things. Absolutely. Do not even think of looking at real estate, anything from abroad. All things that are presented to you are being filtered specifically to take advantage of the fact that you are not here and you don't know what's reasonable. It would make no sense for someone to show you something reasonable, right? Because there's no money in that. There's no money to be made telling you what the real cost of things are, right? I can tell you there are apartments, houses, 3-bedroom houses, perfectly nice places right here in a beautiful neighborhood for rent today, right? $200 a month. I can tell you that, right? And what are you going to do with it? You could, Scott, I want to rent that place. Great. I'll tell you how to reach them. I don't care. Am I going to make a penny on that? No. There's no money to be made on that. Even the people who are renting it are barely making a dollar, right? There's so little money. They're just hoping to not lose money by having the place sit idle. There's no money to be made in real estate here because the prices are so low and houses turn over so infrequently. The only money that really can be made, the only way that anyone could actually pay their bills if they're putting money into trying to sell property and like really putting in an effort, like making websites, making videos, all that stuff, is by inflating the price to outrageous degrees. Because things sell so infrequently, you would need to raise the price. Let's say that the house that we're looking at right here for $200 a month, what would that cost to buy? I don't know, maybe $40,000, maybe $50,000, right? Well, there's very little money to be made on that. If I was going to sell one of those houses, first of all, it would take me a year. I would be lucky if I could sell one of those houses a year. In all the time I've been making these videos, this is important. Of all the people who watch my show, of those who have talked to me and bought a house, of course, many, maybe 1,000 of you have gone and bought houses and not said anything to me. But of those of you who have purchased a house and spoken to me, the total comes out to a total of, let me think, 0, no one. Right? Many of you have come and rented places, apartments, hotels, you know, get a long-term hotel room or get an apartment or rented a house like an apartment kind of thing, right? I get that all the time. That's realistic, right? But coming and buying a place, people just aren't doing that. So if I was in the business of trying to sell a house and I was, and if I was trying to sell it at real prices, yeah, sure, I could turn them over maybe 1 or 2 a year because it's so cheap, but there's also no money to be made. There's no margin, right? So there's no way to actually make money doing that. So I would have to raise the prices and say, oh, well, this house is really worth 40. I'm gonna lie and say it's worth 80. And then I tell the person I'm gonna sell it for 45, and they're gonna be thrilled. You're giving me $5,000 more than it's worth? That's a huge percentage. Oh my gosh, thank you. And then I can pocket 35,000, never tell anybody, and I'm doing great because I only sold 1 in a year, but that's all I have to sell to at least keep the lights on, right? You can live on that in Nicaragua pretty darn well. So that's a huge market. The incentive to completely hose you by misleading you absolutely on the prices of things is so incentivized, and the value of providing actual prices is worthless. So because of that, for all intents and purposes, I'm not saying that there's no exception, but you can never decipher the exception. You from afar will never know which things are good and bad because you have no context to make that decision. If you live in Nicaragua for a long time, then you travel abroad and you look back, sure. But if you haven't been here, if you haven't done your real estate work here, and this takes time, you can't just do this overnight, but if you come here and put in that time, you will instantly or nearly instantly automatically know that these prices are absurd, right? And yes, absolutely, if you want to buy property in Nicaragua or anywhere in the world, you need to go there first. The idea that you would buy from abroad, that you would price from abroad, that you would shop from abroad is really weird. And it's something, and I say this in every video, I don't know what it is, and this is a real thing, I really don't know what is driving people to want to even think of looking at property in Nicaragua when they haven't been here, when it is so easy to come here. It is so cheap, so easy to hop on a plane from nearly anywhere in the world, not always, but almost, come to Nicaragua, look around at prices, decide what you want to do, and like there's a bunch of things that are really important. There's no way to know where you want to be in the country until you've come here. No way. Like, and we're going to go into this in the video that's coming up, but it is out of the question that you have a good idea of where you want to be. Now, some people will be like, I'm going to show him, I'm going to buy in the place I thought, and then he'll see that I wanted to be there. Doesn't mean that. It just means that you're being petulant. You spent a lot of money. The reality is you can't gauge Nicaragua from abroad. Watching my show or Jack Pittman or other people, you could get a really good idea of areas you're interested in. You could rule some places out because they're too hot or too crowded, whatever. But there's so much variety, and knowing what a place feels like, smells like, looks like, works like day to day, how it's like walking down the sidewalk, Watching my show helps, but it doesn't give you the same feeling as being here. A week of being here and running around to different cities will be a completely different experience. And just like that, you'll be like, whoa, I don't like Granada, I like Leon, or vice versa. I don't like the beach, I like the mountains. I don't like the city, I like the country, whatever. Those decisions, those regions, right? Oh, I like what it's like in the north, not in the south. Or vice versa. I like the mainland, the island, the east coast, the west coast. There's so much variety, and that's true anywhere. Right? You wouldn't just say, I'm going to move to the United States and randomly take any house anywhere in the country that someone decided to show you online. And you wouldn't just accept any random price based on other random online prices that are based on nothing. Right? You would never do that, ever. You know you'd be off potentially by 100 to 1,000% on the price of the house. You could overpay by millions of dollars, and you could end up with a house on a remote mountainside on a part of the country that you don't even want to be in. You suddenly realize it's in remote North Dakota and there's not even a road going to the house. Why did you spend $1 million on it? The people who live next door would have given it to you for $5,000 because no one wants to live in it. It's abandoned. I once was in Romania and I asked people, how much would it cost for me to put a house in this town? They're like, seriously, we'll give you a house. I'm like, no, I want a house of my own to live. They're like, no, if you want to live here, we'll give you a house. The houses were worth nothing. But having someone in town who might spend some money was worth a lot. All the businesses in town are like, yeah, if we make $100 on you, we're in good shape. Here's an empty lot that someone has, have at it. Right? That's important things to understand, that you could have land here for basically nothing. You could get a house here for very cheap. Now, you could also find places that are very expensive, but you don't know which are which until you're here. Right? You've got to come and experience any country. None of this has to do with Nicaragua. These are universal rules for buying homes. You don't invest in a place where you've never been, and shopping from abroad is effectively meaningless. And in a place that doesn't have an MLS, a place that doesn't have an online market for any of that kind of stuff, there's nothing to make what you see be real. You don't know that those prices are real. You don't know if those properties are real. You don't even know if those properties really exist. When someone says they've purchased or sold them, you have no way to gauge if that's true. And no one else is gauging if that's true either. So you have to look at it as the number of grains of sand you have to take it as. It's not just that the price might be wrong. It may be every single word might be wrong. The pictures may not be of the property. They may not even be of a real property. I've seen properties listed and it turns out the photos were of nothing, like they were generated somewhere by AI. There are property listings with descriptions that don't match the house, that there's no house there, that the pictures, even when there is a house, they're incredibly skewed to make it look very different than it really is, that put it in a different location or a completely different part of the country or a completely different country. If someone says it has been bought or sold, how do you know that's true? It takes no effort. I today could put up a website or 1,000 websites and say, here's all these different properties. I could coordinate between all my websites and say all these things are for sale, and then suddenly say, oh, they're pending, oh, they've sold, here's how much they sold for. And you could go to site after site after site after site after site. You could spend years going to one site after another that I've generated automatically through programmatic generation and say, I have double checked and triple checked hundreds of times, and every site corroborates that Scott really bought and sold these sites and these properties, and they made all this money, and things are turning over so quickly. And it's all fake. There's no way to verify any of it. It's so easy to fake that because of the way it works. It's not like in the United States or Canada where you have an MLS and you can check with someone who's legally bound to tell you the truth and has access to a system to tell you. You could call a real estate agent here, but they don't have an MLS to look into. They can try as hard as they want, and all they're going to get is, well, someone told me it bought or it sold, unless they're the ones who bought it and sold it. And then you're trusting that they're going to tell you the truth, but there's no law that makes them. So at least not at this time. There's talk of one coming into effect, but it hasn't come into effect yet. So you're in a boat where you have no access to ever verify anything you've seen. So this is a really important life lesson that I have to tell people in all walks. I'm a business consultant, and I have to say this in business terms all the time. When you have something that you have no way to know is true, you have no reason to believe it's true, and you actually have practical guarantee that it is false, don't convince yourself, because everyone depends on this trick. You will convince yourself that you can look at a bunch of false information and derive truth from it. That is not how it works. The more false things you look at, the less able you are to determine what true would look like. It changes your brain and makes you start to believe lies. Even if the first lie was really obvious to you. That's a ridiculous price for that. That house is clearly in Miami, whatever, right? After you see a few hundred of them, pretty soon you start going, well, I've seen 99 houses that said this was $1.5 million. This one says it's 900,000. I bet that's the real price. No, it's not. It's not even close. The house is probably 90,000, right? But they've set you up by showing you 1 million of these really high prices and then a few kind of not as high, and your brain starts to go, there must be truth in here somewhere. But there's no reason to believe that that's true. There's every reason to believe it's not true, but you lose that rationality. All humans do. This isn't about whoever you are that I'm speaking to. This is just how humans work, and accepting that about yourself is important. And the way that you accept that about yourself is you say, there is no way that I can look at false information and gain something valuable from that. That's not possible. So the only way you can protect yourself is to stop looking. Do not look at properties online. Do not look at prices online. Do not look at available lots online. Just don't do it, right? You want to look at companies that have enclaves that you could buy. Okay, that's different. But of lots with things, no. Come here, find out what real is first. Get yourself grounded. Then, using a context of reality, you can start to use other resources. They will not be the ones that you could use from abroad. Nothing here that you can use from abroad is going to be useful. That is simply not going to be the case. And you can start putting together a picture of how much things should cost and what you want. Because both things you don't have right now until you've come here. So once you know what you want, then you can determine what you want should cost, and then you can start shopping one way or another, generally in person. You don't do it from abroad. That's not a good process. And then you can get at least pretty close to a reasonable price. That's the only way you can do it. So every time we say this, we say the same thing. There's no exception to this rule. Do not talk to anyone from abroad. Do not use online resources to try to shop for things. Don't shop before you come, and don't start considering buying until you've been here in person. All of those things, you've got to do all of them. And there's no person who's realistically an exception to those things. Right? Everyone thinks they're going to be the exception. You are not. Everyone thinks that, well, I found the website that he doesn't know about, that you definitely found the one I did know about, right? Well, I talked to this guy. I'm sure that's not the guy he meant. That is definitely the guy I meant. Every single time someone shows me a website, every single time someone mentions a person to me, and I don't mean most of the time, I mean every time, it is always the same 1 or 2 people. It is always the same 1 or 2 websites. You're not the exception, and I'm talking to everybody here, not just one person. Every single one of you, you are not the exception. You are the rule. The exception you think you found, they're the rule. That website you think that's the rule. The more you think it's an exception, I guarantee the more likely it is to be the rule. And this is true. I work in business. This is always the case. The more a company thinks they're an exception to best practices, the more they are textbook example of who should be doing standard designs, right? Every time. It is the more you aren't unique, the more you feel unique. And people who are truly unique often are like, I can't really be unique. Well, the thing that makes you unique is that you don't feel you are. Right? Like that's just how it works. So we've got a long video, like 2 hours long, coming up that's going to tackle this in depth, and it's going to be like in the next 2 days. So please stay tuned. That's going to be a really long one. I'm worried that it's going to be really boring, but it's super valuable. It's really important stuff. So anybody who's looking at property in any context, please take some time and watch that one and really take some time to be like, okay, I have to rethink how I'm approaching this, how I'm thinking about it, everything, because there's this stock set of mistakes that people are almost always making, and they're really dangerous, and we can fix them really easily. And part of the answer is don't send anybody money, including me. I mean, you want to send me money, great, but do it through like buy me a coffee or have me consult for an hour or have me give you a private tour places. I would love to do that stuff. Do not have me sell you a house. I don't sell houses, but if I did, don't do it through me, right? Because that's not a good thing. You're going to get your best deal every time by working with a local, coming up with a place that makes sense, negotiating, and having your lawyer talk to them. We'll talk about all that in detail in the upcoming video, but that is the process that you need to follow. And coming to me and offering me gobs of money to sell you a house doesn't really make sense. Now, okay, if you want to pay me $20,000 and I just have me dedicate, a ton of time to going out and finding you a house, well, okay, right? We can talk about that, but, and that would be different, right? You're not paying me as an agent, you're just paying me as a guy that you trust to go out and look for houses and give you my opinion on houses and talk to people and see if they'll sell them. If you really wanted to do that, yes, that would be, I guess, an okay process because it's completely above board, but that is not what I do. It's not what it doesn't make sense for you to do that. it makes sense for you to come down in person and start learning what you need to know to buy a house, the same as you would anywhere else in the world, especially the US or Canada, where the ante is so much bigger. Thanks for joining me. Like and subscribe. Look for our upcoming video where we're going to tackle this so much more in depth. Get down in the comments, leave more questions, more comments, how you've been screwed by people, where you think you're the exception. Trust me, we're going to find out you're not. All those things. Get down there, let us know. It's great to hear from everybody. And of course, if you're thinking of coming down, let us know. We'd love to see you. Buy me a coffee in person, online, both. That would be great. As always, if you're looking for information, you can email us info@relocatenicaragua.com. We do not sell houses. We just help you understand how to move down. That's just what we do. And that's about it. Share on social media, tell your friends, and I will see all of you tomorrow.